Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, December 27th, 2022. Time for another show, but not for those of you listening live. Sadly, large-scale power outage in the Pacific Northwest, or at least large enough to take out the headquarters, the world headquarters of Netroots Radio, over by where Justice Putnam is. And no idea what that might have done to Joan's power either, by the way. But then again, I can't remember whether Joan is supposed to be on vacation again this week or not. It seems like I don't know. I thought she had told me 2 weeks, and I think it's been 2 weeks, but this does seem like an odd time to come back from vacation, right in between the big holidays when most people are taking additional vacation. I don't know. So I'm not sure. And I didn't think to ask again until way too late. And so, I don't know. We're winging it. We'll see what happens today. And of course, if power is on where she is and she's up for it, oh no, that's right. It's something completely different. Guess what? The good news is it's her birthday. How did that happen? That I thought it was, I don't know. I feel like we said that last time, or maybe we found out last time that it was going to be birthday, and we said happy birthday because she wasn't going to be here. Maybe that rings a bell. Does anybody remember any of this? No one will tell me, of course, because we're only taping the show, and we'll put it out as a podcast in about 2 hours, and then I'll find out. Okay. Well, all right. At any rate, that's okay. At least I can give her the thumbs up during one of the breaks that it's all good and happy birthday, and we'll all wish her well. So, I guess the fact that she answered means, and didn't say anything about a major power outage, that it's all A-okay, though she may have tremendous battery backup. Maybe she's off the grid and solar. I really have no idea. Now it occurs to me, of course, that I'll need to let Scott Anderson know about that, because, of course, I'm getting that frantic waving. All right. So let's see. Yeah, let's tell him. All right. Well, it is, and it is what it is. And hold on a minute while I answer his text here, but I have to go with the podcast, and it's awfully difficult to do with the texting. This is really some test to text something completely different and say something that you know what it is. See how difficult it is? I can't even, that's some multitasking I can't keep up with. I will give you this news, and I'll tell Scott later on. He had sent me another, as Greg sends a raft of stories, not each day, but each day that he appears, certainly. New, winter solstice type holiday tradition has been sending a raft of different teas to, keep me, I guess, healthy and keep the pipes working here at KITM. And so I'm reviewing a new raft of teas, and I hadn't told them how they went so far. So A-okay so far, I think. We'll say hazelnut, not a favorite. But that's just something that it's experimental, and you either hate it or love it. Hazelnut, it's just one of those things. But right now, today's selection is, which one is this one? This is the yerba mate. So, it's unsmoked for those of you who are interested. I didn't know that they smoked that stuff either, but hey. And I think we did a tea based on yerba mate last time. I should have kept the labels of the boxes or something. Although I'm not going to be scrapbooking my tea. Yesterday's experiment was also a kai of, what does the box say here? Organic kai, orange ginger rooibos. What is rooibos? R-O-O-I-B-O-S. I guess we better look it up, and I'll be able to tell you what we're dealing here. I'm unfamiliar with the herb involved. Let's see. Rooibos, R-O-O-I-B-O-S on Wikipedia, and it'll tell me I'm pronouncing it wrong probably as well. Rooibos, really? Okay, well there's the answer for that. Rooibos, not roibos. And it means red bush, in case you were wondering. In what? Afrikaans. So there you go, Elon Musk. Me and Elon sitting down for a cup of rooibos, red bush Afrikaans tea. It is a broom-like member of the plant family. So for those of you who are hoping for something more advanced, a vacuum or even a Roomba, no. It's broom-like and a part of the, who cares, right? Okay, anyway, it grows in South Africa's Finos biome, F-Y-N-B-O-S, Fynbos? I don't know. More Afrikaans than I was prepared for. At any rate, they are used to make a special herbal tea called rooibos, but especially that, at least in southern Africa. Otherwise, I guess, everywhere else, bush tea, red tea, or red bush tea, predominantly in Great Britain. Those of you who will be listening to the show later because you downloaded it in the UK, now you'll know what we're talking about. Okay, well, it's been popular in southern Africa for generations, and since the 2000s, which is one generation, really, has gained popularity internationally, so much so that Scott Anderson was moved to send a box of it my way. It tells me, by the way, that the tea has the earthy flavor that is similar to today's selection, yerba mate, or tobacco, depending. So, how about that? Yerba mate, no wonder they're smoking the yerba mate, but not in that sense. All right, well, at any rate, that's the tea report for today. As it turns out, with the power out, there's no news. There can't be any news because you need the internet for that, but we have it. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest, you're probably quite beside yourself. Let's see. John Shiflett too will need an update today. Let's see. All right. Well, I'll take care of him during the break, perhaps, and let him know that, he's not alone in being unable to pick up the signal this morning. All right, let's move along. Today would have been a great day to take the day off instead, but that's how dedicated we are. Actually, I had to convince myself that it would have been a great day to take off. Joan probably wasn't going to be available. The live show option wasn't going to be available. I could even tape the show and tape it at a different time, and then I began to imagine myself frittering away the day and not sitting down and making the recording. And then I don't know. Then I made myself miserable and sad. Oh, they'll all be so sad and sorry and disappointed. And I imagine that that's the case. So here we are. I have a George Santos update for you, if you can believe that. He's worse than the day before. Now he's come around and admitted his lying. So I guess that's a positive step in terms of his eventual therapy. But for the rest of us, it just makes it more infuriating because he's basically now said, well, what can you do? I lied, but I've been elected and I intend to go ahead and serve, and we'll all just have to get past it. And there's really there will be no remedy for this. The remedy for it, of course, would be for members to just say, we refuse to serve with this guy and expel him. But that, of course, requires a 2/3 vote. The Republicans are sitting on the narrowest possible majority. They're not interested in giving away another seat, and that would be the likely outcome after a special election. And so they're just going to sit there and pretend that this guy can be a congressman. It's going to be real interesting when it comes time to get this guy a security clearance. I have no idea how they're going to be able to believe anything. I guess they'll ask him these questions, and if he can give them answers that seem real and verifiable, even if they're not impressive, they'll go ahead and do it. Or maybe they just, as a matter of course, give a certain level of security clearance to members of Congress by virtue of their holding the office, and do no further security background check or find out if you're a liar or a Russian spy or anything. So, wow. George Santos admits to lying about college and work history, reports the New York Times, which you may understand to be a local paper to the situation, though it was of interest watching the New York Times disclaim any responsibility for having or any responsibility for having missed the story or not reported it in the course of the 2+ years that the guy has been a federal candidate, since this is his second race. They couldn't manage to get all the way out to the outer environs of outer Queens and Long Island to figure this story out. But as I saw someone point out on Mastodon the other day, they were able to send reporters to every diner in the Midwest to seek out Donald Trump supporters and find out what they were having for breakfast that day. So that was a good point. The subheader on this piece reads, the congressman-elect confirmed the New York Times' findings that he had not graduated from college or worked at 2 major Wall Street firms as he had claimed. By the way, before I even get into this story, I think I must have been unable to put it away in pocket from where I first observed it. But I wonder if I can find on Mastodon out there. There was a real interesting note that I guess he now disclaims having made the claim in the first place. How is he dealing with the issue that he had claimed to be of both Jewish and Catholic heritage, but that he claimed Judaism as his own and as his religion, while his parents were both, in fact, Catholic. And his explanation is, I never said I was Jewish, which is is just wrong. I mean, there's a couple of Jewish publications that, did features and articles with him because he was the new Republican Jewish member of Congress. And he went along with the premise of the interview and discussed, Jewish roots, and that he practices, or, he calls himself, a non-practicing Jew. And anyway, he now says, I never said that I was Jewish. What I said was, this is really great, and it was in writing, in print, so I'm not positive that this is exactly what he meant, but it seemed to be setting up so that the emphasis was on the ish rather than on the Jew. That is to say, that when he found out that his family somewhere way back along the lines had some Jewish roots, he decided he's Catholic, but he's Jewish. Like, you get it? Like, he's sort of kind of Jewish. And that everybody just mistook him for mishpucha. Mistook him for mishpucha, I guess. And, well, there you go. That's the new claim. That's pretty outlandish. I don't know if this one is treated in here, but I got to go around and look for that. So a note to self, which I'll never read, to find the George Santos Jewish quote and where that came from. Somebody had a screen grab for it, so it must have been printed somewhere. All right, let's see. Heading over to the New York Times piece about his actual resume background, Michael Gold and Grace Ashford reporting on this story, ending a week-long silence. I didn't realize that was the case. When did he say he was Jewish? Representative-elect George Santos admitted on Monday to a sizable list of falsehoods about his professional background, educational history, and property ownership. Now religion as well. But he said he was determined to take the oath of office on January 3rd and join the House majority. So, he's got a goal, which is nice. I was wondering last night, can we lie to him at all? Is that permitted? Can we lie to him about having taken the oath of office? You just give him some gobbledygook, bring him into another room. You can give him any book you like. You won't recognize the Bible. Unless he is actually a practicing Catholic. He seemed to say he was a practicing nothing. But anyway, give him a Bible, say some gobbledygook, keep him in another room, swear him in fake, tell him he's sworn in, and then each month, instead of paying him, you just say the check is in the mail and see how long that lasts and whether he gets the hint and leaves. All right. Yeah, your vote counted. Don't worry about it. I remember I told you got to write it on a Post-it note and stick it to the window of the House clerk, and they'll just count everything up just fine. You don't have to come in or anything. Anyway, so he's determined to go ahead. Mr. Santos, a New York Republican who was elected in November to represent parts of northern Long Island and northeast Queens, confirmed some of the key findings of a New York Times investigation into his background, but sought to minimize the misrepresentations. There were very few of them. I don't know exactly how you minimize that. My sins here are embellishing my resume, Mr. Santos told the New York Post in one of several interviews that he gave on Monday. That goes a little further than an embellishment. I think that's just making it up from whole cloth. But okay, it's a lot of embellishment. More than usual, we'll say. All right, hold on a minute. Yerba mate break, and then we'll review the flavor for you. I don't know. It tastes like yerba mate. So, or a little bit like rooibos, or however you say it. I don't remember. It didn't taste alike to me, but I think yesterday's Kai concoction had a lot of the orange and ginger in it, and rooibos is the just the secondary bit, though it's the international selling point. Okay, so that's what he says. My sins here are embellishing my resume. Santos admitted to lying about graduating from college and making misleading claims that he worked for Citigroup or Goldman Sachs. Once he had said, that his family-owned real estate portfolio had 13 properties. On Monday, he admitted he was not a landlord at all. I mean, that's a wee bit more than embellishment. So, I mean, no explanation then for the tweet in the middle of the pandemic saying, I don't know why he thought that would be of so much interest to people, but tweeting, the rent forbearance has been such a hardship for me personally, as I am collecting rent from I'm supposed to be collecting rent from my tenants, and it's such a hardship on me, the landlord. You're not a landlord. I mean, it wasn't like it was an exclusive club or anything. It didn't get you verified on Twitter. You didn't get anything extra. There's no additional money. Certainly if you don't own properties, although, maybe what if his job was going around telling people that he was their landlord and collecting rent from them and just living on that and see, what happens. See what happens if they can come and catch me. By the way, Mr. Santos, the first openly gay Republican, maybe, to win a House seat as a non-incumbent, also acknowledged owing thousands in unpaid rent and a years-long marriage that he had never disclosed. So maybe he was gay, maybe he wasn't. That's certainly possible. Maybe he wasn't a landlord. Now he admits that. And not only wasn't he a landlord, but when he was on Twitter complaining about people who didn't pay their rent, he was a guy who didn't pay his rent. So, I guess you could just say he had a dream. What if one day I was the landlord? What if one day I thought I was the landlord? That I can get to. Anyway, I dated women in the past. That's not uncommon. I married a woman. It's personal stuff, he said to the Post, adding that he was okay with my sexuality. People change. Fair enough there. I just, it was a little bit odd to sort of run on the subject, and not be more forthcoming about it. This is can you say he's an openly gay candidate if he's not really open about his history? I guess so, right? And he's open about what came later. Still, seems to me that, maybe open was the wrong word. He's open about where he is now, but he isn't open about where he was in the past. Although, again, people's personal, we'll say for the sake of kindness and decorum, dating history, as opposed to, you could say sexual history. It's not taboo to say so, but that does seem a little bit more than anyone would ordinarily share, especially in the context of a campaign. That's the one you might have to give him a pass on. Except you might say, I might not have been so forthcoming about the openness part. But that's the terminology now. All right. Well, anyway, the admissions by Mr. Santos added a new wrinkle to one of the more astonishing examples of an incoming congressman falsifying his key biographical elements of his background, with Mr. Santos maintaining the falsehoods through 2 consecutive bids for Congress, the first of which he lost. Mr. Santos acknowledged that a string of financial difficulties had left him owing thousands to landlords and creditors. And again, there's a story you could have in common with lots of people. That would be fine. I would think you would be, it's not a great selling point when you're running for Congress, but if it's found out, you say, yeah, like a lot of people had a lot of financial hardships. It's just hard to imagine for someone who also lied about making millions of dollars in real estate. So I guess it was just incompatible with the story he had decided to tell. Let's see. So a string of financial difficulties left him owing thousands to landlords and creditors, but he failed to fully explain in his interviews how his fortunes reversed so significantly that by 2002 he was able to lend $700,000 to his congressional campaign. That is the real question, I think, because that, has some pretty serious implications. The rest of the stuff, whether he was always gay or not, that's probably the least, certainly the least impactful, I would guess. In all of this, Mr. Santos also firmly denied committing a crime anywhere in the world, even though the Times had uncovered Brazilian court records showing that Mr. Santos had been charged with fraud as a young man after he was caught writing checks with a stolen checkbook. I am not a criminal here, not here or in Brazil or any jurisdiction in the world. That's pretty blanket. He told the Post, absolutely not. That didn't happen. In the courtroom file, or the court file, Mr. Santos is identified by his full name and date of birth, as well as by the names of his mother and father. The documents show that Mr. Santos confessed to the crime, and was charged, but that the case remains unresolved because authorities were later unable to locate him. In both interviews on Monday, Mr. Santos also denounced reporting by both CNN and The Forward, a Jewish publication, that he may have misled voters about his account of his Jewish ancestry, including that his maternal grandparents were born in Europe and emigrated to Brazil during the Holocaust. Okay, there was that. I never claimed to be Jewish, Mr. Santos said in the Post. I am Catholic. Because I learned my maternal family had a Jewish background, I said I was Jewish. This is where the print version came from. Okay, Mr. Sorry, that's crazy. Jewish. All right. I've really never run into that one before. Mr. Santos, who has repeatedly said he was religiously Catholic, but has also identified as a non-observant Jew, which he is, told the Post his grandmother had recounted how she converted from Judaism to Catholicism. Okay. Mr. Santos, through representatives, had declined multiple requests to speak with the Times. Over the course of his campaigns, Mr. Santos claimed to have graduated from Baruch College in 2010 before working at Citigroup and eventually Goldman Sachs. A biography on the National Republican Congressional Committee website said he had attended both Baruch and New York University and received degrees that's multiple degrees, in finance and economics. But the colleges and companies could not locate records to verify his claims when contacted by the Times. I never said I worked for Goldman Sachs. I said I was Goldman Sachs-ish because, I don't know, I mean, he's got no explanation for that, and that's pretty major. In Monday's interview, Mr. Santos admitted to the Post that he had not graduated from Baruch College or any college. I didn't graduate from any institution of higher learning. I'm embarrassed and sorry for having embellished my resume. He said, we do stupid things in life. Well, that is also true, and he has done them. He also admitted that he never worked directly for Goldman Sachs or Citigroup. I'm getting explanations from this. I like it. So what's the grain of truth? Well, he blames a poor choice of words there for creating the impression that he had. And no further explanation here, but I think I've read elsewhere that he did work for a company that did work for Goldman Sachs or Citigroup. I guess that Goldman Sachs and Citigroup are claimed to be clients of some place that he worked. Well, where was that? Well, no word on where that was or what the client relationship was, or, delivering bottled water to their offices, sandwiches. Is he fixing the copiers there? What was happening? No one knows yet. He wasn't a practicing Goldman Sachs or Citigroup employee, but, he had that in his background. Past statements of Mr. Santos are relatively clear, however. An archived version of Mr. Santos's former campaign website, preserved by the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, says he, quote, began working at Citigroup as an associate and quickly advanced to become an associate asset manager in the real estate division of the firm. I'm sure he'll say, well, that is clear. I began working at a Citigroup office as a member of the, water delivery team. That's what we call an associate asset manager. I would carry those 5-gallon water bottles up the stairs, and then I became the asset manager in the real asset division of the firm, the water firm. You see, it's perfectly consistent. But instead, he told the Post on Monday that he dealt with both firms through his work at another company. We got an answer here. Linkbridge Investors. Did we read about this one? Is this one of the ones we know about? Which connects investors with potential clients. Linkbridge, he said, had limited partnerships with the two Wall Street firms. The Times was able to confirm Mr. Santos' employment this time at Linkbridge. But in a version of his campaign biography posted as recently as April, Mr. Santos suggested that he had started his career on Wall Street at Citigroup and that he was at Goldman Sachs briefly before his time at Linkbridge. So he was lying until extremely late in the campaign here. A spokeswoman in this case, for Citigroup declined to comment, so it doesn't really matter. Representatives for Goldman Sachs and Linkbridge did not immediately respond to a request for more information, so maybe they'll respond later on. Mr. Santos has not fully accounted for his employment during these years, and later claimed that he was during the years that he claimed that he was advancing on Wall Street. I was walking towards Wall Street is what I meant. I'm advancing on it, you see. In a separate interview with WABC Radio, just a lot of interviews for a guy who lies a lot, he confirmed reporting by the Times that he had worked at a call center in Queens in late 2011 and early 2012. Yet, even as Mr. Santos, whose victory helped Republicans secure a narrow majority in the House of Representatives, admitted to some fabrication, his actions will likely not prevent him from being seated in Congress. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We had a brain outage over the 2-minute break, letting everybody know, even at the bird site, that we're going to be waiting for a podcast today since we're, out of power at the Netroots Radio World Headquarters, and then breaking the news on Mastodon as well. Let's jump back to the latest on Santos, see if there's any further detail here in the end of the New York Times article. Yes, right. So even though he's a big liar and lied about everything and continues to lie, although he does provide some entertainment with his explanations, sounds like it's unlikely that anybody would prevent him or be able to prevent him from being seated in Congress. Democrats, including the outgoing House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the next House Democratic Minority Leader, Representative Hakeem Jeffries of New York, have suggested that Mr. Santos is unfit to serve in Congress because he's a liar, not because he has a less than impressive resume. We got plenty of those going around. The top House Republican leaders, including Representatives Kevin McCarthy of California, have largely remained silent. They're just going to wait it out and swear him in and be done with it. The House can only prevent candidates from taking office if they violate the Constitution's age, citizenship, and state residency requirements, sorta. Once he's been seated, however, Mr. Santos could face ethics investigations, legal experts have said, and it almost certainly will, but Whether anything comes of it, we don't know. Of greater potential concern are questions about Mr. Santos's financial disclosures, where he reported earning millions of dollars from his company, the DeVolder organization. Mr. Santos disclosed little about the operations of his company, and the Times could find no public-facing assets or other property tied to the firm. Mr. Santos also did not list any clients on his disclosures, despite the requirements that candidates list any compensation over $5,000 from a single source. Intentionally omitting or misrepresenting information on a congressional financial disclosure is considered a federal crime. So, he's a little guilty of that one, it looks like. In a video interview with City and State, publication, City and State, Mr. Santos asserted that his consulting practice at the DeVolder organization built upon the work he had done at his former firm, Linkbridge. I had the relationships, and I started making a lot of money, and I fundamentally started building wealth. He made a lot of money, didn't build wealth just yet, and I decided I'd invest in my race for Congress, which is not a great way to build wealth, by the way. Mr. Santos said, adding, there's nothing wrong with that. No criminal conduct, no anything of the sort, maybe. The WABC interview itself was something of a political curiosity. Mr. Santos was interviewed by John Catsimatidis, a supermarket magnate and a big Republican donor, and Anthony Weiner, the former Democratic congressman who resigned in disgrace in 2011. So lots of disgrace to go around in this show. Mr. Weiner asked Mr. Santos about his claim, made in an interview last month, shortly after his election, that a company he had worked for, quote, lost 4 employees, unquote, at the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando in June of 2016. The Times reviewed news coverage and obituaries and found no evidence that could support the claim. On Monday, Mr. Santos shifted his account slightly, telling Mr. Weiner that those 4 people were not yet employees, but instead were in the process of being hired. We did lose 4 people that were going to be coming to work for the company that I was starting up in Orlando, he said. Aha. Mr. Santos did not name the company or provide additional information to support the statement. Public records show that Mr. Santos had a Florida driver's license and was registered to vote in that state in 2016. So brand new to back in New York in terms of his voting registration. And I would like to have heard that exchange too. I mean, I don't know what Anthony Weiner would have had to lose by saying, come on. I mean, all by itself, that's a maybe we'll be at 4 people who were they were out celebrating maybe just recently being hired by this company and they hadn't yet been onboarded, and that's how, I don't think so. But in light of all the other things you've been caught flat-footed lying about, do you really think everybody's would be wise to believe you about that? I mean, that's the kind of follow-up, I guess. Do you think other people would be well advised to believe you? Are they smart for believing you, or are they not? Anyway, I mean, you just tell a lie about that and say, yeah, sure, they're smart for believing me. All right, Mr. Santos was most recently registered to vote at a house in the Whitestone neighborhood of Queens, but the house's owner said he moved out months before the election. In the Post's interview, Mr. Santos confirmed the Times' reporting that he was currently living in Huntington, New York, a town just outside of his congressional district. Parenthetically, they note here, members of Congress are only required to live in the state that they represent, not necessarily the district. Mr. Santos also admitted that he was not, as he claimed last year on Twitter, a landlord who makes significant income from 13 properties owned by him and his family. George Santos does not even own any properties, he told the Post, in using the third person about himself, I guess, even though a financial disclosure he filed with the House in September said he owned an apartment in Rio de Janeiro. I mean, is that the only property he claimed on the form? That seems unusual as well. Okay, there's definitely more to learn about this guy. And whether we'll learn it and whether it will have any impact and what we'll do with him afterwards, well, we know nothing is the answer to that. Well, we'll just have to wait and see how crazy this saga actually gets in the end. Okay, that's pretty weird, I must say. Let's see, other weird news of the world being shared from all corners of the planet. let me click through and get this bit here and finish up a little bit of the delicious yerba mate brew. The silence of... all right, well, anyway, I just thought we ought to catch up on the latest here. I don't know who it is, and I don't know where exactly, but I just want to note for the record that the trend of oligarchs on the outs with Vladimir Putin falling out windows of tall buildings in various places around the world continues unabated. He's lost none of his power and reach in that respect. It seems I happened to catch the Daily Kos Diary, more Russians falling out of windows in tall buildings, written by community member, how do you even pronounce this? Quayor? Maybe Quaoar. You know, we don't read the names out loud very frequently. But at any rate, thank you very much for the diary tipping me off to this. And he's just grabbed a number of items off of Twitter about it. No links to current publications, though I imagine that there's probably news available about it by now. But this happened in India, in a hotel in India. So the comment here, those Indian hotels must be very unsafe places, because he's not the only one. Unfortunately, the Russian MP and oligarch Pavel Antonov, I don't know where they place their emphasis, has died during a trip to India. The founder of Vladimir Standard, a major food industry conglomerate, was found dead after falling out the window of his hotel. He was the richest Russian MP. Wow, that's some distinction, really. And a critic of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is a good way to fall out of a window anywhere. But wait, there's more. His friend died at the same hotel. What are the odds of such a terrible coincidence happening twice in 3 days? How about that? A new wave of mysterious deaths of Russian high-ranking officials, tweets another Twitter user, bird site user. Let's see, on the 24th of December, Alexander Busakov, 66, general director of a military shipyard. On the 25th, this is like an advent calendar, Alexei Maslov, 69, former commander-in-chief of ground forces in Russia. And then also on the 24th, Pavel Antonov, one of the richest members of parliament in Russia. So 3 times in, looks like 2 days. The 24th, 2 people fell out the windows or died mysteriously, I guess. And then on the next day, another one. That is pretty incredible. The death case of Pavel is the most interesting. His body says Special Kherson Cat or Bayraktar _1love on Twitter. Anyway, Pavel's the most interesting. His body was found under the windows of a hotel in India on December 24th. Before that, on December 22nd, so the dates are in dispute here, his friend Vladimir Baydunov, a businessman from Yoshkar Ola, was found dead in the same hotel. Bad for business, I think. Poor Indian hotel getting targeted here. Well, let's see. That's quite a story. I don't think that there's anything else about the mysterious deaths in here, just about general poor conduct by the Russians in Ukraine, as always. Let me see if there's anything about, what was this guy's name again? Maybe I can find something in a more comprehensive in another publication, perhaps, besides borrowing from the Twitter feed here. Oh, that's not good. All right, well, will not let me copy it. For some reason, it just opened up a different window. We don't really need that to happen. Let's get rid of that and go over to news and see if we can find any update about that. Let's see. Oh, here's a report in The Hindu, one in India Today. Let's see. Anything more local to us? Well, no. All right. So let's just take it. As long as it's in the English language, we'll take it from India Today then. 2 Russian men's death at... Oh, boy, that's the way they do pop-ups in India, huh? Very interesting. Okay. 2 Russian men's deaths at Odisha Hotel. Odisha, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but spark mystery and speculation. Vladimir Baidanov died due to a stroke and was cremated, like in the space of 3 days, I guess. And his friend Pavel Antov was said to be depressed after his friend Vladimir's death. That's a good explanation. And he, too, died on December 25th, the police said. However, mystery surrounds the death of the two Russian men. That, according, again, to India Today. Do they do the whole... No, it's just the India Today web desk gets credit for this. Mystery surrounds the deaths of two Russian men who died at a hotel in Odisha's Rayagada. Okay. I don't know anything about the regions and subregions. Within a span of a few days, under different circumstances, Vladimir Baidanov died of a stroke, while Pavel Antov was found lying in a pool of blood outside the hotel on Saturday. Speculation is rife about the death of Pavel Antov, who, according to several media reports, was fiercely critical of Russian President Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine. It's it's not a healthy situation for people who do that. All right, let's see. Reportedly, in this telling, a former lawmaker in Russia and believed to have died after falling from a third-floor window 2 days after his fellow traveler was found dead there. There's speculation that it was a possible hit job, as they say here. Several Russians, especially businessmen critical of Vladimir Putin, have died in similar ways in Russia in the past. However, the Russian embassy has reportedly said that the Odisha police haven't yet found any criminal link in the hotel deaths of the two citizens. Well, there you have it. I don't think there's going to be any revelations in the second half of this article, but it's quite a situation. I'll just say that. All right. Well, that's sort of a random entry in our Tuesday collection. Here's an interesting piece here that this would be something I would ordinarily discuss with Joan, but we'll just give it to her as a birthday present. I thought this was an interesting dilemma. I hadn't counted on this one. Reported in The Hill by Mike Lillis. The headline is, "Who's the new number 4 Democrat? There may be a dispute." I guess there's some question with changes that have been made to the leadership lineup, not just new leaders in those positions, but changing the positions to a certain extent as well, renaming, creating a few new ones. Which one counts as the number 4 ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives? And the answer is a little unclear. As Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy scrambles to shore up enough GOP support to become the next Speaker, House Democrats are grappling with a question swirling around their own leadership hierarchy next year. Who, in fact, is the number 4 Democrat? At a certain point, it doesn't really matter that much. And you can say, well, we know who the top 3 are, I guess. And that really ought to be enough. And as for the rest of them, well, they don't really necessarily rank one over another anyway. They all share pretty much the same rank, 4 through 10, you could say, without causing too much difficulty, I guess, but apparently not. Apparently there's no agreement on that, and we're having a fight over number 4. Most in the caucus presume that ranking, number 4, falls to James Clyburn. That matters. He's one of the few members of the previous leadership to continue on, and under the structure where I'm a Democrat in Congress, but where the Democratic caucus held the leadership reins, right? The Speaker was the number 1 rank there, and Clyburn as Majority Whip ranked number 3. So now I guess, maybe he's more interested in holding on to a number and a ranking, and in his new position, he would be number 4, the assistant leader spot. And we never really had an assistant. There were plenty of people assisting the leader, but it's a relatively new creation. I don't think it's new this time around, but it's and it's also, I should say, a common thing when parties switch status, particularly when they are booted from the majority to the minority, and you have a leadership structure, and you have to hammer it in with one less spot available to you, the speakership no longer available to you. If, as was the case in the last couple rounds where this happened, Pelosi stayed on in leadership, she would step down from the speakership to minority leader. That was easy enough Pardon me, had to hit the mute button there with a little, allergic reaction. Oh, yerba mate, you're killing me. Okay. Well, anyway, it was easy enough to understand that Nancy Pelosi would be stepping down from the speakership to the minority leader slot. But, of course, there, Steny Hoyer would have been in the majority leader slot. So what does he become? And the answer usually was that he would step back into minority whip as the second ranking minority member. But then the majority whip loses his spot and has to step down into something else. And sometimes they would go ahead and create a different spot for him. And I think they've done that here, saying Clyburn, who used to be the number 3 Democrat, as majority whip, will be the number something else. Yeah, but this time stepped back into a spot that was number 4. He's not the number 3. And, of course, the whip job isn't available to him. But being chief deputy whip or assistant whip is demotion even further than number 4. So, anyway, they created a spot for him and called him assistant leader. Clyburn is a powerful 30-year veteran lawmaker and a senior member of the Congressional Black Caucus who played an instrumental role in President Biden's successful White House run. So that's part of the reason why it makes good sense to let him stay on if he wants to. Yet Representative Ted Lieu of California, the incoming vice chairman of the Democratic caucus, is subtly, because you have to be careful about these things, questioning that hierarchy. The vice chair has always been ranked just below the caucus chair, and because the caucus chair in the in the 118th Congress will be the number 3 position, why wouldn't the vice chair be number 4? The answer has been complicated by the Democrats' soon-to-be minority status, which clipped the seat from their leadership roster, and by a confusing reshuffling of the pecking order that followed this year's midterm elections. The last time the Democrats were in the minority, the caucus chair seat was the number 4 position, below minority leader, the Democratic whip, and the assistant leader. So they used that position again last time. But that hierarchy was altered following this year's midterm elections when the new caucus chair, Representative Pete Aguilar of California, jumped to the number 3 spot. The promotion was designed to keep intact the incoming triumvirate of new leaders, Hakeem Jeffries of New York, Catherine Clark of Massachusetts, and Aguilar, to replace the long-standing Democratic team of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Clyburn, who have led the party for almost 2 decades. While Pelosi and Hoyer have stepped out of leadership altogether, Clyburn ran successfully to keep a spot within the party brass as assistant leader, a position first created by Pelosi the last time the Democrats lost their House majority in 2010. Clyburn's decision caught many Democrats by surprise, and it had a domino effect up and down the leadership ladder. Not only did it force Aguilar, who was initially eyeing the assistant leader spot, to seek the caucus chair position instead, it pushed Representative Joe Neguse, is that how he pronounces that one? Neguse, of Colorado, who had already declared his candidacy for the caucus chairmanship, to seek a new position atop the Democrats' messaging arm rather than take on Aguilar. In all the reshuffling, it was never explicitly stipulated what the hierarchy beneath Jeffries, Clark, and Aguilar would be. See, there I say, just give it a tie. Everybody's number 4. All right. Well, anyway, internal rules for the House Democratic Caucus list no specific order for the various leadership positions, although it's been widely held that the rankings of each seat are reflected in the order of the closed-door elections that decide them. Yeah, interesting. That informal system was muddled this year, however, because Clyburn was not in Washington on the day that the other top leaders, Jeffries, Clark, Aguilar, and Lieu, were elected. Clyburn returned the following day to secure his assistant leader spot uncontested after Representative David Cicilline withdrew his last-minute challenge. Okay. I'm more distracted by the pronunciation of his name than what happened. The issue is a delicate one, and few members of the leadership team have wanted to touch it. Neither Clyburn's office nor Aguilar's responded to a request for comment on Friday, Liu also declined to comment in any detail, but when asked about the leadership hierarchy, he showed a reporter a picture of a press conference earlier this month featuring 4 members of the incoming leadership team: Jeffries, Clark, Aguilar, and himself. "Here, see," said Liu, a military veteran who will be the highest-ranking Asian American in the next Congress. "Other than that, I have no idea." From a practical standpoint, the question of which lawmaker is number 4 is essentially meaningless. The duties and titles of neither the vice chair nor the assistant leader would change based upon their numerical ranking, and given the personalities constituting the incoming leadership team, rank-and-file Democrats said they don't anticipate any internal frictions. But the rankings could be significant at some point down the line, some lawmakers said, if a vacancy emerges within the leadership team, or the House flips back to Democratic control and questions of succession emerge. I guess. It's possible, although that would, it's not a problem I would be afraid of having, if we could have the majority back, for one thing. For another, it doesn't necessarily follow that you automatically succeed to the next step up the ladder or anything, but it does, it is assumed that you might run to move up the ladder, and if without a presumed leading candidate already in place for these jobs, I guess it could touch off a leadership battle, but nothing wrong with that either. They resolve those pretty quickly and easily. Anyway, right. So Hoyer, who is stepping out of leadership in the next Congress, said party leaders ought to resolve the leadership dispute, but he also made clear that it was a job for the incoming team, not the outgoing one. That's true. Now that they are in these exalted positions, they are going to have to make those decisions, said a chuckling Hoyer. He does see the humor in it. And I don't know, relatively healthy attitude for him to take. Okay. That's an interesting one. Something happening behind the scenes that you don't often hear a great deal about. Okay, let's see. The next break, top of the hour break, coming up pretty soon here. But let's see, that makes decisions on which direction to go a little bit more complicated. But this one looks like perhaps a slightly shorter read. Then we'll get to the longer stuff later on. And today might be a good day. We'll see about revisiting those in-depth reports from TPM about the texts that went back and forth between Mark Meadows and various members of Congress. Although I do feel like if any really seriously important stories emerged from those in-depth reports, we would have heard those in separate standalone discussions since then. So perhaps a different direction. First, then, something I caught also published in the New York Times, but a guest piece from Adam Schiff, which is interesting all by itself, and making an interesting point about the January 6th committee reports. He writes in his headline here, "My fellow members of the January 6th committee and I don't want you to forget about, quote, the Republican congressmen." What exactly does he mean here? I imagine he's talking about the Republican congressmen who involved themselves in the January 6th plot. Don't just focus on Donald Trump, after all. And he writes as follows: on December 27th, 2020, more than 6 weeks after losing re-election, an infuriated President Donald Trump telephoned his acting, that's right, acting, you heard it, acting Attorney General, Jeffrey Rosen. Mr. Trump's former Attorney General, Bill Barr, had announced his resignation less than 2 weeks earlier after telling the president that the claims of election fraud Trump had been trumpeting were, as Mr. Barr later bluntly put it in his testimony, bullshit. Yeah, right. I wanted to use the correct one, even though I much prefer the one with the wind-up of that.
That's bullshit.
Right. But that's what he called it. Barr used that word in particular and publicly affirmed that there was no fraud on a scale that would affect the outcome of the election. I hate that phrasing. Just say the basic truth. There just wasn't any election fraud. There was some, I guess. They have to say it that way. I don't know. Anyway, with Mr. Rosen's deputy, Richard Donahue, also on the line, Mr. Trump launched into the same tired, disproved, and discredited allegations that he has propagated so often at rallies, during news conferences, and on social media. False publication. Arrest him. None of it was true, and Mr. Donahue told him so. According to Mr. Donahue, Mr. Trump, exasperated that his own hand-picked top appointees at the Justice Department would not affirm his baseless allegations, responded, "Just say," as he says, "just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." It was a remarkable statement, even for a president who had serially abused the powers of his office. Having been told by the very department that had investigated his claims of fraud that they were untrue, Mr. Trump told the acting attorney general that his deputy to lie about it and say that he would take it from there. Or rather, to lie about it, and then he said he would take it from there. Okay. That Mr. Trump was willing to lie so baldly about a matter at the heart of our democracy, whether the American people can rely on elections to ensure the peaceful transfer of power, now seems self-evident, even unremarkable, when we consider the violent attack on the Capitol he incited days later. But Americans shouldn't lose sight of how this behavior indicts the former president, and not just the former president, but also the Republican members of Congress who he knew would go along with his big lie, and who are still members of Congress and expect to be members of Congress in the next session. The report released Thursday from the January 6th committee on which I served makes abundantly clear that there were multiple lines of effort to overturn the 2020 elections. Some involved attempts to pressure state legislatures to declare the loser to be the winner. Others involved a fake electors plot, pressure on the vice president to violate his constitutional duty, and efforts to force an elections official to, quote, find thousands of votes that didn't exist. You know where that happened, in Georgia. It was only when all of these efforts together failed that the president resorted to inciting mob violence to try to stop the transfer of power. But one line of effort to overturn the election is given scant attention, and that involved the willingness of so many members of Congress to vote to overturn it. Even after Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police put down the insurrection at great cost to themselves, the majority of Republicans in the House picked up right where they left off, still voting to overturn the results in important states. Don't forget that. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. All right, where do we leave off? Oh, we were reading about Adam Schiff and his take on things. And don't forget the role that the Republican congressman played in January 6th and in the immediate aftermath. Okay. Right. So at one of our January 6th committee hearings, the committee vice chair, Liz Cheney, a Republican, we remind you, called out her colleagues in Congress for their duplicity in the most searing terms. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, and that'll be awesome, by the way, but your dishonor will remain. With our work on the committee largely concluded, it will now fall to the Justice Department to ensure a form of accountability that Congress is not empowered to provide, and to vindicate the rule of law in a manner beyond our reach, through prosecution. Multiple laws were violated in the course of a broad attempt to overturn the election, and not just by the foot soldiers who broke into the Capitol building that day and brutally assaulted police officers, but also by those who incited them, encouraged them, and when it was all over, gave them aid and comfort. I like use of the term of art, aid and comfort there, but okay. Even if they're going to continue to ignore setting on foot, which I think is a mistake. Bringing a former president to justice, who even now calls for the, quote, termination of our Constitution, is a perilous endeavor. Not doing so is far more dangerous. There is a growing disdain for the law and for our country's institutions, and a frightening acceptance of the use of violence to resolve political disputes. Mr. Trump's big lie has been one of the most powerful instigators of political violence, since it persuaded millions of people that the election they lost must have been rigged or fraudulent. If people can be convinced of that, what is left but violence to decide who should govern? I mean, it actually makes a certain amount of sense if you accept the idea that, well, no matter what we do, they're just simply not going to let us have a fair election. I don't know exactly where you turn other than to violence, but that's the calculation. That's what they're looking for. The attack on the Capitol was an all too foreseeable consequence of Mr. Trump's relentless effort to alienate the people from their government and from the most important foundation of governance, their right to vote. Even the Constitution cannot protect us if the people sworn to uphold it do not give meaning to their oath of office, if that oath is not informed by ideas of right and wrong, and if people are unwilling to accept the basic truth of things. None of it will be enough. But if we allow ourselves to be guided by facts, not factions, and if we choose our representatives based on their allegiance to the law and to the Constitution, not something that they did in Long Island, obviously, then we should have every confidence that our proud legacy of self-government will go on. It is our hope that this report will make a small contribution to that effort. Our country has never before faced the kind of threat we documented. May it never again. Well, some hopeful and wishful thinking there, particularly if we don't actually manage to punish anybody for this at the higher levels. But just one of the risks we take, I guess. All right. So just wanted to kind of get that one on the record. And let's see, some other items I wanted to go through that are probably longer reads, including the Just Security, Ryan Goodman and Justin Hendricks at Just Security, going through the January 6th report and highlighting what they think qualifies as top moments in the report that require your attention. And it looks like a rather long read, but a good day to do it, the decks being cleared for this action. And none of you able to stop me by following along on the KITM hashtag. So you'll have to just wait and see. And boy, won't you be surprised. What follows, Ryan and Justin say, are highlights of the January 6th Select Committee's final report from our initial review. Our discussion includes, but is not limited to, the report's findings and treatment of issues, including, we start off with a bulleted list, criminal misconduct and efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Racism is a driver of efforts to overturn the popular vote in different parts of the country and in fueling some of the organized groups and individuals who attacked the Capitol. The apparent intelligence and law enforcement failure and the committee's perspective on it. That's important. Number 4 here, not numbers, but bullets. The pressure campaign on state election officials to deviate from their legal obligations. And lastly, the role of social media in propagating false claims about the election and serving as a mechanism to plan acts of violence. With so much at stake for American democracy, the January 6th report provides the public an opportunity to reflect on persistent threats to the rule of law, good point, rule of law, elections, racial justice as well, and freedom from political violence. So, what's up? We begin with section 1 here. White supremacists, white nationalism, plus anti-government extremists. So a bit of a toxic stew here. The January 6th report does well to make explicit one of the drivers of the efforts to overturn the election, racism. Good point. That includes, but is not limited to, second use of that phrase, white nationalism, a political project which is a particularly sinister and dangerous manifestation of the white supremacist ideology. The racist dimension is a theme that has been presented most powerfully by Chairman Benny Thompson of Mississippi in his remarks at the opening and closing of the committee's public hearings. I'm from a part of the country where people justify the actions of slavery, the Ku Klux Klan, and lynching. Representative Thompson said in his first hearing, I'm reminded of that dark history as I hear voices today try and justify the actions of insurrectionists on January 6, 2021. Racism helped propel post-election efforts to disenfranchise voters in major urban areas in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere. Helped galvanize the concerted disinformation campaign against black election poll workers Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, and helped drive militia groups, neo-Nazis, and similarly minded domestic terrorist groups to help plan and participate in the Capitol attack. And in case you have forgotten, you might be reminded of the fact that the efforts to change the outcome of the vote in Michigan started with saying we ought to throw out all the votes in Detroit because it's hopelessly corrupt, but nowhere else apparently in Michigan was of any concern. Giuliani, for example, seized on a clip of Freeman passing Moss a ginger mint, claiming that the two women, both black, were smuggling USB drives as if this is a quote, as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine. Just a little race baiting there, maybe a little bit. Not only were Giuliani's claims about Freeman and Moss reckless, racist, and false, they had real-world consequences that turned both women's lives upside down. And further heightening the personal impact of these baseless attacks, President Trump supported and even repeated them as described later in the report. Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, mother and daughter, were besieged by incessant, terrifying harassment and threats that often evoked racial violence and lynching, instigated and incited by the President of the United States, the report states. After providing a detailed list of state and local officials across several battleground states subject to waves of racist, sexist, and anti-Semitic threats, galvanized by Trump and Giuliani's public demonization of them. The report also contains discussion of the role of white nationalist extremists, such as online provocateur, and that's in scare quotes, Nick Fuentes and his Groypers, a loose network made up of figures that hold racist and anti-Semitic views. It provides an in-depth look at the crucial role of the Proud Boys, Western chauvinists, they say, known to promote an exclusionary, hyper-masculine interpretation of Western culture in organizing and executing the breach of the Capitol. The report notes that Ethan Nordine, a Proud Boys leader involved in the attack at the Capitol, invoked the day of the rope when discussing his intent to reject the outcome of the 2020 election, referring to a day of mass lynching of quote, race traitors in the white supremacist novel, The Turner Diaries. Yikes. White supremacists and Confederate sympathizers were among the first rioters to enter the U.S. Capitol, the report explains. At the same time as making these racist through lines more widely understood, the report helpfully identifies right-wing anti-government extremism with a focus on the Oath Keepers and the Three Percenters as a related movement that explains the conditions that gave rise to the January 6th attack. It notes these closely related movements produced what might be thought of as a presage for the assault on the Capitol. Presage? How would they? I'm not even certain now that I think about it. Another one of the words that I read all the time and just don't use in my spoken vocabulary. As far-right extremists protested or inside state capitals or at other government buildings in at least 68 instances between January 1st, 2020 and January 20th, 2021. We have always thought that white supremacy should be foregrounded in the analysis of the January 6th attack and the efforts to disenfranchise voters in the ways Trump and his associates chose to do. Policymakers, scholars, and the general public can benefit significantly from grappling with the evidence and analysis provided by the Select Committee. Section 2. False Slate of Electors Scheme. The Principles. One of the highly active parts of the Justice Department's investigation into the efforts to overturn the election involves the false slate of electors scheme. The January 6th report provides new and compelling evidence pointing to Trump, Meadows, and Giuliani and their direct roles in organizing the scheme to replace the rightful delegates to the Electoral College, determined by the outcome of the popular vote with individuals loyal to former Trump to falsely what? They forgot the word president here, I guess. Replace them with individuals loyal to former President Trump to falsely certify his winning their respective state. What's more, the evidence against Meadows, Trump's White House chief of staff, and Giuliani, Trump's personal attorney, is also evidence against Trump because they worked as his right and left hand. Meadows and Giuliani appear to have been acting at Trump's direction and orchestrating the scheme. In addition, the report does not include all of the Meadows texts that further corroborate these damning findings. Oh, all right. I didn't realize that they didn't include that, but I guess they don't. But now we have them anyway. These passages highlight some of the new evidence. Ready for this one? It reads, in early December, the highest levels of the Trump campaign took note of Cheeseborough's fake electors plan and began to operationalize it. On December 6th, the White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows forwarded a copy of Cheeseborough's November 18th, 2020 memo to Trump campaign senior advisor Jason Miller, writing, quote, let's have a discussion about this tomorrow. Miller replied that he had just engaged with reporters on the subject, to which Meadows wrote, if you are on it, then never mind the meeting. We just need to have someone coordinating the electors for states. Miller clarified that he had only been, quote, working the PR angle, and they should still meet, to which Meadows answered, got it. Later that week, Miller sent Meadows a spreadsheet that the Trump campaign had compiled. It listed contact information for nearly all of the 79 GOP nominees to the Electoral College on the November ballot for Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And on December 8th, Meadows received a text message from a former state legislator in Louisiana recommending that the proposed Trump electors from, it says AR, which is Arkansas, but it notes, sick, that is, I guess, some sort of a mistake. They must have, I wonder what they were trying to do. Or maybe Arizona, is that what he thought he was doing? Because the list includes Arkansas, which is the mistake, Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada, and leaves out Arizona. But let's see. Proposing that they all meet next Monday at their state capitals, call themselves to order, elect officers, and cast their votes for president, and then certify their votes and transmit that certificate to Washington. And Meadows says, we are doing that. Cassidy Hutchinson, a special assistant to the president and assistant to the chief of staff, Mark Meadows, confirmed Meadows' significant involvement in the plan. Hutchinson told the select committee that Meadows followed the progress of the fake electors effort closely and that she remembered him frequently having calls, meetings, and outreach with individuals, and this just being a prominent topic of discussion in our office. When asked how many of his calls or meetings it came up in, she estimated dozens. The evidence indicates that by December 7th or 8th, President Trump had decided to pursue the fake elector plan and was driving it. The Trump campaign Associate General Counsel, Joshua Findlay, was tasked by the campaign's General Counsel, Matthew Morgan, around December 7th or 8th, with exploring the feasibility of assembling unrecognized slates of Trump electors in a handful of states that President Trump had lost. Findlay told the Select Committee, it was my understanding that the president made this decision. As recounted by Findlay, Morgan conveyed that the client, President Trump, directed the campaign lawyers to, quote, look into electors in his potential litigation states. But since it was written, it really never was in his voice, and I'm sure he probably didn't even type it. So, okay. Continuing here, we're still in the quote from the report. President Trump personally called RNC chairwoman Ronna Romney McDaniel days before December 14th to enlist the RNC's assistance in the scheme. President Trump opened the call by introducing McDaniel to John Eastman, who described, quote, the importance of the RNC helping the campaign to gather these contingent electors in case any of the legal challenges that were ongoing changed the result in any of the states, unquote. And that was their more legitimate claim. Yeah, I mean, it was wrong and untruthful, but that was seen as the more legitimate path to getting alternate electors used, right? We're just using them, and they're casting ballots in case we win one of our court cases, and they throw out the electoral votes of one or more of these states. We want those states to have some votes in the Electoral College, so we're hoping that they will use our alternative ones. But then it becomes very clear that they're just thinking of simply swapping the certificates at the end, like they were going to swap the frozen concentrated orange juice report in Trading Places, just flat out fake it. Anyway, according to McDaniel, she called President Trump back soon after the call ended, letting him know that she agreed to his request and that some RNC staffers were already assisting. While the campaign's core legal team stepped back from the fake elector effort on December 11th, it nonetheless went forward because Rudy was in charge of it, and this is what he wanted to do, according to Findlay. When Findlay was asked if this decision to let the effort proceed under Giuliani's direction was coming from your client, the president, Findlay responded, "Yes, I believe so. I mean, he had made it clear that Rudy was in charge of this and that Rudy was executing what he wanted." That's the end of the clip from the report. Now back to the commentary at Just Security. With the committee's work, the false slate of electors ends up being the scheme in which Trump and Meadows may face the greatest legal jeopardy. The two men, and Giuliani, put their fingerprints all over the plan, and the Justice Department will presumably be able to uncover more information to determine whether to proceed with indictments. Section 3, pressure on state officials, a vast and organized scheme. The January 6th report provides new information about the breadth of Trump and his closest associates' efforts to pressure state officials to exceed their legal authority to reverse the election outcome. Okay. The Select Committee estimates that in the 2 months between the November election and the January 6th insurrection, President Trump and his inner circle engaged in at least 200 apparent acts of public or private outreach, pressure, or condemnation targeting either state legislators or state and local election administrators to overturn state election results, the report states. In other words, Trump and his associates' efforts were directed not only to the notorious phone call to Georgia's Republican Secretary of State Brett Raffensperger and in phone conversations with Arizona's Republican House Speaker Rusty Bowers, but in a more systematic fashion with state and local officials across the battleground states where Trump lost the popular vote. Oh, hey, here's some news. I don't know if any of you were sitting by your radio hoping that the show would come on from out of nowhere earlier than expected, but it has. So I've got the thumbs up from Justice that I guess, technically speaking, I guess we're on live now at this point, though it being 10:20 or so, you probably gave up and decided to wait for the podcast, but that's okay. If you happen to be sitting by your computer tuned into Netroots Radio, well, congratulations. And you get the additional treat of a couple minutes of live broadcast before the podcast comes out later on. So, those of you just joining us, we're reading from Just Security, their highlights from Ryan Goodman and Justin Hendricks, their view of the highlights of the January 6th committee report. We're in section 3 here, pressure on state officials. Okay, where we left off, such an overarching pattern of behavior may become valuable evidence in establishing a criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States. Under 18 U.S. Code Section 371, in the Department of Justice investigation, as well as in establishing criminal offenses under state law, such as in Georgia, where Fulton County is looking into things. In pursuing criminal investigations, law enforcement agencies and the Department of Justice in particular may have a greater ability to get witnesses to testify than the committee did. The case of Michigan Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey provides an example of someone with an apparent story to tell, but reluctant to speak with the committee. Was reluctant, really, I guess. And here, a passage taken directly from their report. President Trump called Michigan Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey 3 times after their White House meeting. Remember, he was summoned to the White House. November 21st, November 25th, and December 14th. Shirkey did not recall many specifics of those calls and claimed he did not remember the president applying any specific pressure. The day after one of those calls, however, Shirkey tweeted that, quote, "Our election process must be free of intimidation and threats, and it's inappropriate for anyone to exert pressure on them." From this and other public statements, it is clear that Shirkey was sensitive to outside forces pressuring people with roles in the election. In fact, the same day that the Electoral College met and voted former Vice President Joe Biden as the winner of the 2020 presidential election, Shirkey received another call from President Trump and issued another public statement. Shirkey's statement that day December 14th, 2020, read, Michigan's Democratic slate of electors should be able to proceed with their duty free from threats of violence and intimidation. And it is our responsibility as leaders to follow the law. Okay, so yeah, he may have some more talking to do. Section 4, Anatomy of the Attack. Understanding the Trump effect and indicators of a seditious conspiracy. Some supporters of President Trump have argued that the attack on the Capitol was already underway even before Trump ended his speech at the Ellipse. An implication is that his words cannot thus be regarded as incitement or causal. That idea, of course, need not be propagated only by the former president's supporters. It is an important counterintelligence question worth asking. The January 6th report presents in exacting detail an analysis of the structure of the attack that points to two stark conclusions. First, the report shows that the attack would not have succeeded without Trump's fiery speech at the Ellipse. The President of the United States at that time directed a mass of his followers to march on the Capitol. He set them on foot. Please say it. But he directed them to the Capitol. Context is important. He laid the groundwork. He told the crowd they needed to, quote, take back our country from an election, quote, stolen from you. Their rightful leader had been deposed in a fraudulent election, and the only way to get him back was to, quote, fight like hell. When you catch somebody in a fraud, you're allowed to go by very different rules, he said, which is not actually true. You're not allowed to go by different rules at all, ever. The rules are the rules, and those are the ones you go by. But this is not just about analyzing the content of his speech. The report goes into depth, explaining how a first phase of the attack with the Proud Boys and their associates at the tip of the spear was successfully repelled by the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department. After the initial breaches, the U.S. Capitol Police was able to deploy enough officers to stop rioters from advancing past the base of the inauguration stage. More importantly, rioter momentum was further halted when the first group of Metropolitan Police Department officers arrived on scene at 1:11 p.m., almost precisely as President Trump finished his ellipse speech. The report states a stalemate ensued. Law enforcement officers, however, were completely overwhelmed by the second wave when thousands of rallygoers came over from the Ellipse. Without that speech, without that mob, the report explains in authoritative terms how the assault on the Capitol would not have happened. Second, the report presents extraordinary evidence and an analysis of a pre-planned operation by the Proud Boys that appears to have worked hand in hand with the closely held plan that Trump would direct the crowd to march on the Capitol. The report states, ready for another excerpt, shortly before the joint session of Congress was set to begin at 1 p.m., the Proud Boys instigated an assault on outmanned law enforcement at the Peace Circle, ironically enough, a key location. They quickly overran security barriers and made their way onto the U.S. Capitol's restricted grounds. Throughout the next several hours, members of the Proud Boys led the attack at key breach points, preventing law enforcement from gaining crowd control and inciting others to press forward. President Trump finished his speech at the Ellipse at approximately 1:10 p.m. Toward the end of his remarks, the president directed his supporters to march down Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol. Their natural path took them through the Peace Circle, which had already been cleared out by the Proud Boys and their associates. Such a coincidence, they remark, is not anywhere sufficient to indicting someone on seditious conspiracy charges, but it raises the chilling prospect of coordination between Trump's plan to dispatch the mob and the Proud Boys' planned assault. This section of the report is among the most impressive. Accordingly, readers should be aware of the remarkable sources and methods that the committee used in its analysis. And it recites thus, the Select Committee reviewed extensive footage of the attack, including that recorded by the U.S. Capitol Police's surveillance cameras, the Metropolitan Police Department's body-worn cameras, publicly available videos, as well as on-the-ground film produced by an embedded documentarian. The select committee interviewed rioters, law enforcement officers, and witnesses that were present on January 6th, while also consulting thousands of court filings. Using these sources of information, the select committee developed a timeline of events to understand how the unprecedented attack on the U.S. Capitol unfolded. Okay, so admirable and a good recitation of their methods. A little bit more commentary before winding up on this section and our third segment of the show. The section discusses in detail the actions of others such as Alex Jones and Ali Alexander in mobilizing and channeling the crowd and in communicating with the Proud Boys. Records for Enrique Tarrio's phone show that while the attack on the Capitol was ongoing, he texted with Jones 3 times and Jones's colleagues 5 times.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on the newly restored Netroots Radio. Let's continue on with our reading of the Just Security article. We were just saying, as the break approached, that communications records from Enrique Tarrio's phone shows that while the attack on the Capitol was ongoing, he texted with Alex Jones 3 times and Jones's colleague, specifically Owen Schroyer, 5 times. That just being one example of the coordination going on. It will be for the Justice Department to crack open this part of the case. The committee has given them and investigative reporters not only many a lead, but a roadmap. And that term is used advisedly and harkens back to Watergate, of course. Number 5, section number 5 here, a major lawsuit in the offing. January 6th report points to Dominion voting systems options against Trump. No wonder we were discussing that yesterday. I knew there must have been a relation between the two articles. In its executive summary, the committee stated, Trump again made false and malicious claims about Dominion voting systems. The reference there is to the former president's January 6th speech at the Ellipse, and a table the committee presents displaying examples in which Trump made similar public statements about the company. Chapter 1 of the report includes a lengthy 8-page treatment of the topic, providing evidence that Trump demonstrated a conscious disregard for the facts and continued to maliciously smear Dominion. We have previously discussed this topic at Just Security, publishing a roundup of leading experts' views, and reread that yesterday in preparation for this article. As it turns out, the introduction to their views reads, almost every expert said a defamation suit brought by Dominion against Trump would be very strong, but one expert raised concerns about the practicality of such a lawsuit, and another raised issues of presidential immunity. Now, Section 6, the intelligence failure, the Select Committee's refusal to assign blame. This is one of the more serious shortcomings, and I've seen a couple people address it. I think we read, was Quinta Jurecic the one, Jurecic, whichever, the one who brought this to our attention last? I think so. One of the topics the January 6th report addresses is the role of law enforcement and domestic intelligence agencies including the FBI and DHS, and why they apparently failed to anticipate the scale of possible violence at the Capitol and prepare law enforcement agencies accordingly. While the report acknowledges that a vast amount of information was gathered from social media, as well as from tips and other sources of information, indicating extremist groups were openly planning for violence, the committee takes pains to suggest the reasons for the failure to reckon with the full extent of the threat was a lack of insight into the schemes and mindset of then President Trump. In the introduction to the report, the committee notes that, ready? Neither the intelligence community nor law enforcement obtained intelligence in advance of January 6th on the full extent of the ongoing planning by President Trump, John Eastman, Rudolph Giuliani, and their associates to overturn the certified election results. Such agencies apparently did not and potentially could not anticipate the provocation President Trump would offer to the crowd in his ellipse speech. That President Trump would spontaneously, quote unquote, spontaneously instruct the crowd to march to the Capitol. That President Trump would exacerbate the violent riot by sending his 2:24 p.m. tweet condemning Vice President Pence, or the full scale of the violence and lawlessness that would ensue. Nor did law enforcement anticipate that President Trump would refuse to direct his supporters to leave the Capitol once violence began. No intelligence community advance analysis predicted exactly how President Trump would behave. No such analysis recognized the full scale and extent of the threat to the Capitol on January 6th. This point is underscored again later in the 154-page executive summary, suggesting that direct knowledge of President Trump's malign intent was the missing component that would have completed the intelligence picture. In the quote here, again, this type of intelligence was shared, including obvious warnings about potential violence prior to January 6th. What was not shared and was not fully understood by intelligence and law enforcement entities is what role President Trump would play on January 6th in exacerbating the violence, and later refusing for multiple hours to instruct his supporters to stand down and leave the Capitol. No intelligence collection was apparently performed on President Trump's plans for January 6th, nor was there any analysis performed on what he might do to exacerbate potential violence. Certain Republican members of Congress who were working with Trump and the Giuliani team may have had insight on this particular risk, but none appear to have alerted the Capitol Police or any other law enforcement authority. So in other words, just to reiterate, they were saying, well, and I mean, this is understandable. The intelligence community and law enforcement community were, not prepared to anticipate and to bring into their routine analysis of a potential threat the possibility that the President of the United States would be the one launching that attack and exacerbating it. It doesn't enter into their calculus, and that's true. And that's kind of shocking, and it deserves to be stated in its own right and held up as a particular problem, because you can't really design your system that way. I mean, I understand why they didn't, and it's just that much more shocking to find out that, or rather not to find out, we already knew, but to sort of see it there on paper that yes, the President of the United States launched a terrorist attack against the United States, and we didn't know about it because no one was monitoring the activities of the President. One, because you can't, and two, because it's okay that you can't, because, hey, when is the President going to launch a terrorist attack against his own country? That's never going to happen, right? So don't worry about it. Except now we have to worry about it. And we have no methodology for dealing with it because the President of the United States is one of those unmonitorable individuals. I mean, he's eminently physically monitorable. I guess it's just that there's legal barriers to doing it. And it's very hard to undo those because they were, purposefully erected here. But okay. At any rate, in his foreword, Representative Thompson repeats this idea, saying, but the shortfall of communications, intelligence, and law enforcement around January 6th was much less about what they did or did not know. It was more about what they could not know. The President of the United States inciting a mob to march on the Capitol and impede the work of Congress is not a scenario our intelligence and law enforcement communities envisioned for this country. Prior to January 6th, it was unimaginable. Whatever weakness existed in the policies, procedures, or institutions, they were not to blame for what happened on that day. Well, I wouldn't go that far necessarily. I don't think they did a fantastic job in actually gathering intelligence from and recognizing the importance of intelligence that they gathered from social media. But it should also be said that, well, it's yet to be proven. But I imagine it's a doable task and not particularly difficult one. But my supposition is that these agencies were also headed by people who were complicit in at least sympathetic to the leanings of the president that was directing this. I don't know if they knew exactly what he had in mind. I don't know if he knew exactly what he had in mind, but I wouldn't be surprised to find out that their intelligence gathering efforts could have been sufficient to the task, but that they were suppressed along the way. But if they weren't, or even if they were, really, honestly, whatever the outcome is, it should be, I think it's fair game to say, look, we invested multiple billions of dollars in building the Department of Homeland Security post 9/11 so that this sort of threat to the United States would never be missed again. And guess what? In its first test, it was missed again. So, from a financial standpoint, or a policy-making standpoint, you might say, perhaps this multi-billion-dollar apparatus is worthless. Although you might say, it's working pretty good against international terrorism. It's domestic terrorism that it doesn't work very well with, particularly domestic terrorism driven by the people who run this department. Essentially, thanks to the Unitary Executive Committee, or a theory that is now the case, right? President Trump is personally responsible for directing the Department of Homeland Security, even though he's not supposed to have to bear that responsibility. But when they get in trouble and they need some reason to hide records, they use the Unitary Executive Theory to do it. So stand on its head and lay the blame where it belongs. All right. Representative Thompson concludes that his concerns are less with the mechanics of intelligence gathering and security posture, as important as those questions are, but rather remain first and foremost with those who continue to seek power at the expense of American democracy. The committee's framing is odd, particularly given the degree to which the intelligence failure at multiple agencies has been documented and the extent to which the report itself makes clear that the threat of organized violence was clear. Was it really impossible to factor in the possibility that Trump might behave erratically or advance false claims, or worse, that might incite the crowd at his rally at the Ellipse? Take these three indicators, which are not mentioned in the analysis. Even before I go into that, I guess that's true. Put that way, is it really so difficult to predict that Trump might behave erratically or make false claims? No. Not at all. That he might incite violence at a rally? No, he does it all the time. Yeah, I guess that's a good point. So anyway, take these three indicators which are not mentioned in the analysis. Mike Pence's chief of staff, Mark Short, was concerned that Trump would endanger the safety of Pence by publicly lashing out on January 6th. So much so that he alerted the head of the vice president's Secret Service detail the day before. So good eye there, right? Short testified, concern was for the vice president's security, and so I wanted to make sure the head of the vice president's Secret Service was aware of that. Likely, as these disagreements became more public, that the president would lash out in some way. So he predicted it. Then there's General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who had repeatedly expressed concerns that Trump might seek to create what he called a Reichstag moment. I don't see how he could make it any clearer than that. And worked behind the scenes to limit the possibility that Trump might try to take advantage of brown shirts in the streets. Then, as documented by Just Security, in addition to numerous instances in which Trump fomented violence before 2020, in the year prior to January 6th, Trump, in word and deed, inspired violent groups, gave support and legitimacy to armed insurrectionists in states that had imposed pandemic restrictions, and repeatedly refused to say he would ensure a peaceful transfer of power. That timeline notably starts with reference to an op-ed in January of 2020 by former acting U.S. Attorney General for National Security, Mary McCord, now a member of the Just Security editorial board and a leading expert on militia groups, McCord wrote that Trump's tweets at the time, quote, incited insurrection against state governments. Okay, well, good use of the terminology there, but she was talking about incitement of insurrection against state governments. So she didn't exactly call the shot for January 6th, but at least, I guess, among the first to throw around the term of insurrection. So some credit there, tremendous amount, I would say. In sum, there is reason to doubt where the report lands in its assessment, a set of conclusions that shifts responsibility away from the FBI and other intelligence agencies for this historic intelligence failure. The report does, however, include a substantial examination of what should be done differently going forward in other respects. For instance, the report's recommendations include an entry on violent extremism, noting that an entry? Okay. His recommendations include, an entry on violent extremism, noting that federal agencies with intelligence and security missions, including the Secret Service, should A, move forward on whole-of-government strategies to combat the threat of violent activity posed by all extremist groups, including white nationalist groups and violent anti-government groups, while respecting the civil rights and First Amendment civil liberties of all citizens. I suppose easier dreamed of than done. And B, review their intelligence sharing protocols to ensure that threat intelligence is properly prioritized and shared with other responsible intelligence and security agencies on a timely basis in order to combat the threat of violent activity targeting legislative institutions, government operations, and minority groups. And here, I guess I would jump out, and I don't have the evidence before me that the just security analysts had, but it seems to me you might spend some time at least vetting and disproving, if that's the ultimate conclusion, the theory that several of these key departments and divisions were headed by Trump loyalists who had perhaps been instructed, perhaps explicitly, perhaps not, that they ought not to let any alarms proceed up the chain. It may be the case that, these departments still can't, really proactively be trusted to properly share and distribute information and facilitate a whole of government approach. Or it may be that they were essentially sabotaged by Trump supporting directors at vital choke points who refused to allow or to approve the sharing of this information. It's not a seamless network of sharing information. Each of these steps has to be approved, and they can be choked off at any point by somebody who is either just wrong about the situation, incompetent, or in on it, either explicitly or implicitly. Like I said, it could be anything. Do I believe necessarily that Chris Wray felt that he was acting on explicit instructions from Donald Trump not to let that information be disseminated? Or whoever it was, Chad Wolf at DHS, even him, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But it was also pretty clear that it became very easy to guess for these people what would please or displease Donald Trump and what he would do with the outcome in either case. And it became pretty easy to anticipate, well, here's information damaging to Donald Trump that he would be angry about are acting on. And so let's not do it so that I'm not fired and replaced by another acting director. So that would be the implicit direction to them, as opposed to don't allow this information up the chain because I'm planning a coup, which he may have been, discreet enough not to blurt out to everyone in government. Anyway, there is a recommendation. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I stop at this one? Was it section B saying they should review intelligence sharing protocols? Right. I think we got all the way through that, but I don't remember the ending of this one. Review the intelligence sharing protocols to ensure that threat intelligence is properly prioritized and shared with other responsible intelligence and security agencies on a timely basis in order to combat the threat of violent activity targeting legislative institutions, government operations, and minority groups. And In a recommendation related to Capitol Police oversight, the report suggests Congress should continue to monitor improvements in the department's intelligence processes and its critical incident response protocols. Okay, do better. There you go. Crucially, the committee appears to concur with the findings of a U.S. Government Accountability Office investigation that considered why, given the available intelligence indicating the potential violence on January 6th, the events at the Capitol were not designated a national special security event, which would have ensured a higher degree of security at the Capitol. That is a part of the intelligence failure that has nothing to do with anticipating Trump's actions. The committee recommends that, given what occurred in 2021, Congress and the executive branch should work together to designate the joint session of Congress occurring on January 6th as a national special security event. Seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but okay. A 30-page appendix concerns government agency preparation for and response to January 6th, concluding that there are additional steps that should have been taken to address the potential for violence that day. The appendix lays out the substantial amount of information collected and disseminated across the federal government and law enforcement agencies. It notes that although some of that intelligence was fragmentary, it should have been sufficient to warrant far more vigorous preparations for the security of the joint session. The failure to sufficiently share and act upon that intelligence jeopardized the lives of the police officers defending the Capitol and everyone in it. What then are the causal explanations for the failure to sufficiently share and act upon intelligence? Yet again, even this section hedges, evading placing blame on intelligence and law enforcement agencies. While the danger to the Capitol posed by an armed and angry crowd was foreseeable, the fact that the President of the United States would be the catalyst of their fury and facilitate the attack was unprecedented in American history, and I guess it is. The appendix states, if we lacked the imagination to suppose that a president would incite an attack on his own government, urging his supporters to fight like hell, we lack that insight no more. It's like Chief Wiggum. It won't happen again. Oh, God, it better not. Whatever the line was from Krusty. Section 7. And I'm not certain. I think this is the last one. Yes, the scroll tells me that it is. The role of social media, an afterthought at best. According to legislation that established the January 6th committee, the members were mandated to examine how technology, including some online platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Reddit, may have factored into the motivation, organization, and execution of the insurrection. Almost a year ago, the committee issued subpoenas to Alphabet, that's Google, Facebook, now Meta, interesting that they've both changed their names, Reddit and Twitter, demanding records relating to the spread of misinformation, efforts to overturn the 2020 election, domestic violent extremism, and foreign influence in the 2020 election. Two key questions for the Select Committee are how the spread of misinformation and violent extremism contributed to the violent attack on our democracy, and what steps, if any, social media companies took to prevent their platforms from being breeding grounds for radicalizing people to violence. Representative Thompson wrote at the time. He indicated the subpoenas were issued because the companies had failed to voluntarily provide information useful to the investigation that the committees had requested. Now, in his foreword to the January 6th report, Representative Thompson notes the committee pulled back the curtain at certain major social media companies to determine if their policies and protocols were up to the challenge when the president spread the message of violence and his supporters began to plan and coordinate their descent on Washington. The report is replete with references to the role that, in particular, Twitter played as a key channel for the former president and his supporters to advance false claims about the election and ultimately to call on crowds to travel to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. The central importance of Trump's December 19th tweet, the "Be There, Will Be Wild" tweet, is made apparent, and there is substantial discussion of the role of fringe sites such as the Donald.win and Parler in the organization of extremist groups and planning for violence, with reference to Just Security's reporting, in particular on the Donald.win, There is a segment on the role of the QAnon conspiracy in animating extremists, mention of key social media influencers and organizers such as InfoWars host Alex Jones, and an appendix that addresses the role of foreign state actors in pushing disinformation and narratives intended to influence the electorate. That said, there is very little in the report concerning the types of considerations referenced in the subpoenas. The committee makes no explicit judgment on whether the platforms themselves could have done more to address the spread of the big lie and festering extremism, either in the immediate run-up to January 6th or in the years prior, during which networks such as QAnon emerged. Rather, the committee includes in its recommendations an encouragement to congressional committees to continue to investigate these questions, and says so thus. The committee's investigation has identified many individuals involved in January 6th who were provoked to act by false information about the 2020 election, repeatedly reinforced by legacy and social media. The committee agrees that individuals remain responsible for their own actions, including their own criminal actions, but congressional committees of jurisdiction should continue to evaluate policies of media companies that have had the effect of radicalizing their consumers, including by provoking people to attack their own country. If the committee did collect more specific information from the tech platforms, such as internal assessments or other testimony beyond that of a former Twitter employee highlighted in the 7th public hearing in July, it did not appear to merit mention in the final report. It is a bit thorny, I guess. The committee is expected to release additional materials, including more transcripts of witness depositions and perhaps other evidence before the start of the 118th Congress on January 3rd, 2023. Some of this underlying material, already in the hands of law enforcement authorities, will likely prove valuable to the ongoing investigations led by the Department of Justice, now under Special Counsel Jack Smith, and in the ongoing investigation by Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney Fannie Willis. The trial of the Proud Boys leaders will commence early next year, and litigation related to false claims about Dominion voting systems will proceed, at least against Trump associates. While the committee's work may be complete, the events of January 6th will continue to reverberate well into the new year and beyond. Like the 9/11 report, the January 6th final report will serve as a resource and a warning for decades to come. I hope so, and I hope it's taken seriously, but we have yet to see. All right, just a few minutes left here before we wrap up for the day. Maybe I can, at this point, take the suggestion of John Shiflett, who's been waiting patiently for our podcast to become available. I am sure he suggests on the fake elector scheme this work from the Bulwark. So we'll open that one up and read. And he pulls out a quote here just in case we don't make it all the way through. But the fake elector scandal, while not the most shocking of Trump's predations, has long looked like the straightest route to cracking open the entire 2020 election scheme and getting to Donald Trump getting indicted and convicted of a crime. This is from What the January 6th Report Says about the fake electors scheme. Philip Rotner at the Bulwark just yesterday. Let's see if we can fill in just a little bit more before we end for the day. That was the title. The subheader here reads, Freaking Trump Idiots Want to Fly Original Elector Papers to the Senate President. I like it. All right, Phil Rotner, what do you got to say here? On December 14th, 2020, Republican operatives in at least 5 states, each of which had officially certified Joe Biden as the winner, forged and submitted to Congress and the National Archives fake electoral college certificates purporting to certify Donald Trump and not Biden as the duly elected winner. The left-leaning watchdog group American Oversight first blew the whistle on the fake elector scheme in March of 2021, but it wasn't until Rachel Maddow devoted a series of shows to it in January of 2022 that it really captured public attention. I think it captured my attention pretty damn quick, but okay. Anyway, we'll read just another paragraph or two before exiting for the day. The fake electors were hardly the worst of what Trump visited on us for sheer journalistic sex appeal, a scheme by a bunch of unknown, bumbling state functionaries to phony up some documents just can't compete with the president sicking an armed mob on the Capitol. But the fake elector scandal, while not the most shocking of Trump's predations, has long looked like the straightest route to cracking open the entire 2020 election scheme and getting Donald Trump indicted and convicted of a crime. At least until the Mar-a-Lago stolen documents scandal was revealed. That's true. But that's another story. If Trump was a knowing participant in the scheme, more on that later, his reasons for doing so would make absolutely no difference. Even if he really truly believed that the election was stolen, it would not be a defense to criminal charges for participating in a fraudulent scheme to submit forged documents as the official results of state presidential elections. That would be awfully hard to get away with, I would think. All right. Let's see. To the contrary, his belief that he was stealing back a stolen election would be highly incriminating proof of his motive, not a defense. Yes, that would be pretty difficult to deal with. Okay. Oh, by the way, news from Netroots Radio headquarters. Still having some residual power problems there. Power outages, pops up and down, shuts down the stream, starts over again after a bit. Quite a bit of damage here that I'll need to attend to. So no live show for today for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy either, though a pod hopefully will ensue. Okay. Well, that gives us a chance to tell you, I don't know what. We'll be back tomorrow. We will, anyway, and we can always do the podcast just the same. Greg Dworkin calls in just the same, provided that power is on in Connecticut as well as here. We got our battery backups here. He's got a whole house generator, but I know he prioritizes the refrigerator and heater over the show, and I think rightly so. Okay, so we'll return perhaps to reading this piece. A good suggestion. Thanks, John, for sending that one along. And perhaps we'll give that a read tomorrow. Again, in the meantime, stay tuned later in the day for the podcast of the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I just imagine that it involves an esoteric collection of news from around the country and around the world, as usual. So stay tuned for that later on.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, I have a whole day here to catch my breath between the Tuesday and Wednesday shows. We'll continue with some of this reading and bring you Greg's raft of stories tomorrow. That makes it a little bit easier. I only have to do this non-stop thing for about an hour tomorrow. Makes it much simpler. Thanks, Greg, and thank you for listening. We'll see you tomorrow.